Move on to our last predetermined topic of the day, and that is a video from Frank Turek. The title of this video from Frank is "The Mistake That Most Atheists Make." So let's find out what we atheists, for those of you who are atheists, I am one, let's find out this moral mistake that all of us keep making. Oh, and I edited out some of the start of this video. There's quite a bit of preamble. Again, this is in the context, like a lot of Frank's videos, of a question and answer session at a college. The college student had a very long question to start with about Sam Harris's Moral Landscape book. Basically summarizing it, hopefully you're roughly familiar with what Sam Harris argues in that book. Sam basically agrees that with the idea of objective morality, but he grounds objective morality in diminishing suffering, reducing pain, human flourishing. I don't necessarily agree with Sam on that, and perhaps we'll have a longer view someday, but that's the preamble to this question and where we start with Frank.
Like, again, I believe God authors morality, but I think we shouldn't brush over the idea that Sam does establish kind of a baseline for morality and well-being. I think the metaphor he put was, if you can imagine a world where everyone experienced the most pain possible, we can at least all objectively agree that anything else but that would be better.
So in case you're not following along, this student, even though he's a Christian, he admits several times that he is a Christian and believes the kind of thing that Frank teaches. He's a little bit bothered by the moral landscape, and he thinks that Sam has a point, that if he created a point where there was a universe where every creature in it was suffering the most possible all at once, that you'd be able to plot that on a graph and say, well, that's the worst possible universe. And that if you have one point on a graph like that, then you can, start to have other points on the graph and start determining things objectively. Again, I'm not arguing for that, but that's what Frank is arguing. Or not Frank is arguing, that's what Sam Harris is arguing.
For the question, basically, I want you to expound more than you did in Stealing from God, like, at least you can, like, in this amount of time.
I wonder if maybe we didn't explain ourselves clearly in there, Jack, because our point is not that we disagree with Sam Harris in his book, The Moral Landscape, that human flourishing is a good thing. We do agree with that.
So I find that this is an excellent point of agreement that you can have with theists or people of other worldviews that ground morality on something else, to get them to agree, at least that we generally, human flourishing, reducing suffering, is a point of agreement that we can build on. And ideally, you can actually cut through all the rest of it. Like if you're talking to someone who thinks that all morality is necessarily grounded in God, and you don't think so, you can still come to find some good choices and determine what choices best lead to those common goals you can both pick to. And you can argue, you know what? Would you say that, and I think Frank is agreeing here, God affirms human flourishing and God affirms reducing suffering. So you and the God believer, the God believer and the non-God believer should be able to come to some consensus about what actions are moral or potentially more moral than others based on those common goals, and not have to worry about how we came to find those goals. I think you can have that discussion and not everything in morality is black and white. So for example, one might argue about what is the best strategy for solving the issue of homelessness or conflict in Ukraine right now. What is the best response, or what would be the most humane response, or the best way to have the fewest deaths, for example? Obviously, you can argue about those things, but what you want to have is that point of agreement that, the goal is maximizing flourishing and minimizing suffering. Then you can say, is action A or action B most likely to produce the outcome we're looking for? I would love it if we could all just stop talking about morality and the ontology of it, and just focus on the part we agree on and try and come up with the best goals for that. But no, Christians really care how we got there. They want to show the math, and they want to show the math in an authoritarian way, which we'll get to.
Don't agree with is the foundation for that. Because if there is no God, then why human flourishing? Why not dolphin flourishing?
Yes. With or without God, why human flourishing versus dolphin flourishing? Because it seems Frank is admitting that you could set up an entire moral system that was set up hypothetically around dolphin flourishing and reducing dolphin suffering. And that would be a system by which you could evaluate actions. We don't happen to choose that, but Frank is acknowledging that you have to choose something in order to make these evaluations. Where he's lost, in my view, is his lack of understanding that by choosing the God of the Bible, he is making a choice, and that is not an absolute choice, because even if that God exists, I can make other choices for my moral system. That is not an absolute that I'm required to do. I may be choosing he could argue that I'm choosing a lesser standard, and that's fine. But it's not an absolute standard. Maybe there will start a new cult of people who, not even a cult, might be worth, there's an argument to be made that dolphin flourishing is what we shall be fighting for. So long, and thanks for all the fish. For those of you who know, you know.
I think what Sam
Or
is...
cowboy flourishing.
I think he does...
No, screw cowboy flourishing. I moved away from Alberta. Cowboy flourishing is not a thing. Sorry, cowboys.
Have like somewhat of a case that at least physical pain on that paradigm...
Unless it's the Dallas Cowboys. I used to like them. Troy Aikman days, they're the Cowboys. Sorry. Non sequitur.
holds weight for something of an objective morality. Again, like
but why is it wrong?
See, the student kind of gets it. This is why the student is bothered and is asking this question. He wants to agree with Frank, but he's like, but doesn't he have a point? You can ground everything that we would say is good in Sam Harris's proposal. And it seems like, in fact, you can actually come to some better decisions that way, because the Bible is silent on a lot of things. The Bible is silent on use for social media and how to use it and when to use it and where to use it. But if we want to say, oh, how can we use social media to maximize flourishing and minimize suffering, then we can come up with ideas. And this doesn't even get into, of course, the ideas about where the Bible is wrong on potentially on your interpretation of LGBTQ issues or abortion rights or all those kind of things. There's the short list of things that we typically end up fighting about. But if we agreed to a single standard, and this student seems to understand that human flourishing is a good one, and he's challenging Frank, we can get somewhere. We can't get somewhere if we just want the God to be the arbiter.
Inflict pain on people, according to him.
I think because...
Oh, so sorry, I talked over it. The question, Frank is saying, well, what if someone decides that pain is good? Then that person would go around inflicting pain. It's a bit of a misformed question because you don't quite know whether Frank means, does the person who is inflicting the pain enjoy inflicting pain? Or is he inflicting pain upon someone for whom pain is a pleasure? So, of course, there are people in the world who, anything from scary movies to sexual preferences can involve pain and scared, and like some of those feelings we associate with that as positives in certain contexts. And so you can't always use pain in that sense to make your evaluation. But ultimately, if the person prefers that, then that pain is flourishing. I think it's a kind of a side dance that attempts to sidestep an issue in a way that doesn't. It's a distinction without a difference. Doesn't really matter. But Frank is feeling a little desperate at this point.
What if you get enjoyment from it?
I think even from a secular standpoint, there's a base given knowledge that physical pain...
Hang on, Jack, because we got a long line.
Frank has lost patience with this student and his preamble and amble about why he thinks that Sam Harris might have a point. So Frank's cutting this short.
Yeah, I
I
understand.
see what you're saying. This is not an epistemological problem. It's an ontological problem. It's not how we know.
If I had $1 for every time I heard someone tell me that it was not an epistemological problem, but an ontological problem, I would have several dollars. It's something I hear often, especially when I made my morality challenge videos. To me, that is the distinction without a difference. I'm going to let Frank finish, and then I will elucidate more.
What good and bad behavior is. It's how do you define what good and bad behavior is in the absence of God? How do you discover what good is? Remember,
again, we can discover what good and bad are the labels that we provide, the labels we put on. We put good on the labels of outcomes that we desire, and we put bad on the label bad on outcomes that we don't desire. And of course, there's biological reasons for desiring certain survivability, thriving. If we were a species that didn't value surviving, then we would just be dead because our species wouldn't have lived this long. So it's just there's adequate grounding in the survival benefits of thriving and avoiding suffering that explains enough of it. Frank is acknowledging it can explain it. If you take those things, you can come to some conclusions that seem similar to his about what actions are better than others for that criteria. But Frank is saying, well, that's not good enough that you can use that grounding. We need something more meta.
if there's no purpose to the game, you can't say that, oh, this play is a better play than this other play. This behavior is a better behavior than another behavior if there's no purpose to life.
He's almost getting it. So Frank just said, if you don't have a point of the game, you can't tell that one action is better than another. So for example, if you don't know what the rules of basketball are, you don't understand why putting the ball into one particular basket is better than putting the ball into another basket. He's so close, because that's exactly what we say, Frank, until we agree upon those goals, because the rules to basketball are arbitrary. The rules to chess are arbitrary. But once we agree to them, then within those confines, we can objectively decide whether one action is better than another action. Absent those, then we can't agree. But he's also saying we need to know what the purpose of the game is. The game has a purpose. Well, no, Frank. The rules of the game are not the purpose of the game. The rules are what you agree upon. The different people participating in the game might have entirely different purposes. One person participating in the game may just be hyper-competitive and like beating people. Another person playing the game, and that's their purpose for playing within the rules. Another person may be participating in the game because they're looking for exercise to improve their health. And yet they are following the rules. But their purpose is not to follow the rules. Their purpose is to improve their health. Other people may have social reasons to be participating in the game. Others may be mandated there as some part of some larger project. Other people may be wanting to make that their career and earn a living at playing that sport. Those purposes of all those people are different. What they have in common is they've chosen arbitrarily to agree to the rules and therefore can understand. They don't need to have this grand purpose for why they're playing in common. They just need to agree to the rules. Frank?
Understood.
And there is no purpose to life on Harris's atheistic, materialistic worldview.
I concur.
Yeah. The ultimate purpose of life isn't something that is solved by Sam Harris's version of objective morality. But what you haven't shown, what you have not demonstrated, is that there is a purpose. You can jump meta all you want. Well, what's the purpose? But then maybe I can just jump the next level higher. What's the purpose of that purpose, Frank? And what's the purpose of that purpose of that purpose? You can keep jumping there. But what you have to demonstrate for it to be meaningful to at least someone like me is to demonstrate that there actually is a there and not just philosophers discussing for the sake of it.
Yeah,
All right.
thank you.
All right, thanks, Jack. By the way, Jack, that's good you brought that up, because that is the biggest, I think, disconnect that atheists have on the moral argument. They always confuse epistemology and ontology.
We don't confuse epistemology and ontology. We can demonstrate epistemology, and we can demonstrate how epistemology works, and we can demonstrate how all the phenomena that you want to attribute to something else, like people's intuitions and the shortcuts, the linguistic shortcuts that people use saying, oh, this is right and that is wrong. Even what they really mean is, if we want to, if we want to reduce suffering and have a society that's worth living in, then this is wrong. No, they just say this is wrong, because that's our intuition. We can explain all that with our epistemology, and that's grounded. So I'm not confused that you think there's an ontology above that. What we're saying is you have not demonstrated that there is a there, that this feature, meta feature greater than the natural world and survivability that fully explains everything needs further explanation. Demonstrate that, and then we'll care. We're not confused. We don't think what you're talking about makes sense.
Epistemology is how you know something. Ontology is the study of the thing you know. Why does that thing exist to begin with? And I think that's what they always forget.
We don't always forget, because you guys mention it all the time. That's the go-to. Ontology versus epistemology. And I get it. I understand it. I just don't think it means anything. But what do you think? Perhaps that doesn't make any sense. Perhaps you drop me a super chat to tell me that what I'm saying doesn't make any sense, or you've dropped it in the comments, or you're discussing with your friend. That's the whole point of this show, is to have some chats about these things and to see what's up.